Hello, nice to see you on my channel, Hearts and Shadows. Enjoy watching.
My name is Sean. My marriage to Abigail, my wife, crumbled after a situation at a dinner. When she kept making comments that put me down, one of her friends looked her in the eye and said, "Let's go outside." They both stepped away, leaving me at the table, unsure of what was being said. But as I sat there alone, I had a quiet reflection. What happened after that dinner is part of the choice I made. She never saw it coming, and it would shape everything that followed. When I first met Abigail, I believed I had found someone rare. We dated for just over 2 years, and in that time, nobody would convince me she's not the one. She was beautiful and warm with words. She made everything sound more interesting than it really was, and being around her felt exciting. One of the things that drew me in, though, would later become the thing that chipped away at me. Abigail liked to tease me. At first, it seemed playful. She'd call me names that were just a little too close to insults or tell exaggerated stories about me that made people laugh. But it started feeling less like fun when she'd do it around others I am not particularly free with. I remember early on, I told her that some of the things she said didn't sit right with me. They felt disrespectful. She brushed it off, smiled, and said I was taking it too seriously. "I'm just joking," she'd say. "Don't be so uptight." That put me in a strange spot. I didn't want to be the guy who kills the mood, the overly sensitive boyfriend who couldn't take a joke. But at the same time, I didn't want to feel like I was being made fun of in my own relationship. I wanted her to be comfortable with me, free to be herself, but not at my cost. Still, she didn't stop. She only dialed it down a little. And instead of drawing a firm line, I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth creating drama over. I kept the peace and chose to ignore what I now know were early signs of deeper issues. That choice would come back to haunt me later. When I proposed, I tried to make it a special moment. She looked at the ring and joked that it looked cheap. I didn't know how to react. I laughed it off, even though my stomach sank. She eventually said yes, but something about that moment stuck with me. During the wedding planning, Abigail was all in as she was involved in everything. We got married and she moved into my home, and I tried to settle into married life, believing that once things slowed down, we'd find our rhythm. Despite being married now, the teasing never stopped. In fact, it evolved. She'd say things, and I couldn't tell if she was joking or being serious. Her tone always made me second-guess how I was supposed to feel. I didn't know how to respond, so I did what I thought was expected of a husband. I kept quiet. Happy wife, happy life, right? We once went on a double date. We got invited out by some married friends, just the usual couple stuff. But even there, in public, she found ways to jab at me. Someone asked her how married life was going, and without missing a beat, she laughed and said, "Don't let him cook, he'll burn the water." Everyone chuckled. I smiled too. But somehow, I wasn't sure about the way she turns my flaws into entertainment for others. I remember thinking, why does she always have to do this? Still, I said nothing. Because back then, I thought keeping the peace was more important than anything. About 1.5 years into our marriage, I got the kind of news no one ever wants to hear. My company was downsizing and had to let me go. After the shock wore off, I was upset, sure, but I figured I'd land on my feet. I'd worked hard, had good experience, and I thought in the meantime, we'd manage. Abigail was working, and I assumed we could get by while I searched for something better. But when I told her, she didn't even wait to hear the full story. Before I could even mention the possibility of her helping out financially for a while, she freaked out. "No exageración." She started asking me, "So how are we supposed to run the house now?" I was silent, then she continued, saying, "What you made wasn't even enough before. What now?" That hit me hard. I hadn't even asked her for anything yet. I was just trying to tell my wife that I lost my job. I stood there speechless, not finding the words to respond. For the next 3 months, we lived on what I had saved. I didn't ask her for a dime. I stretched every dollar I could, cut back on everything. I took the pressure quietly, thinking she'd at least appreciate that I was trying. Eventually, I found another job, but the pay wasn't great. It was steady, but it wasn't on the level of what I used to earn. And she made sure I felt that difference every single day. Abigail started snapping more and picking fights over the smallest things. She acted like everything was my fault, like losing my job meant I failed her as a husband. I didn't know what she earned at her job, and she never offered to share. So I kept handling the bills the best I could, even when it started to drown me. Asking her to cover something felt like walking into a storm I wasn't prepared for. One evening, I asked if she could help out by picking up something for the house with her money. Her response was, "You're hopeless with everything. Now I am forced to be a man." That statement was filled with contempt. Like I disgusted her. Even my best friend noticed the change in her attitude. One day he pulled me aside and said, "Man, I don't like the way your wife talks to you sometimes." I gave him a half smile, the kind you use to hide your own embarrassment, and said, "You know how women behave." But even as I said it, I knew I didn't believe it. I just didn't know what else to say. A close mutual friend of ours was celebrating their wedding anniversary, and they decided to host a small dinner, just a few couples they were close to. When we got the invite, Abigail was thrilled. She went on and on about what she would wear, down to the shoes, the purse, even the exact shade of lipstick she wanted to try for the night. She talked about it like it was a runway event. Meanwhile, I was sitting in silence, exhausted. My new job had been draining me, and things between us at home weren't just tense, they were awkward. I really didn't want to go, but I have to for our friends celebrating and didn't want to start another argument at home either. So I pushed myself and went. From the moment we sat down at that venue, I knew it was going to be a long night. Everyone else got my wife's usual charm and bright laughs. I got her sarcasm and clipped responses. When the waiter came around and I didn't catch what he said clearly, I asked him to repeat it. Abigail snapped, right there at the table, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He said it twice already. How can you not hear?" I felt the heat crawl up the back of my neck. I nodded, pretending I was fine. Later, I mispronounced the name of a wine, some French name I wasn't familiar with, and instead of just correcting me quietly or letting it go, Abigail laughed out loud and said, "It's pronounced this, not whatever you just said." The whole table laughed with her. I forced a smile and kept it going. And just when I thought I could survive the night without any more damage, she brought up an old, embarrassing story about me. Something I definitely wouldn't have shared in that room. She told it like it was hilarious, and they all laughed again. I was shrinking inside and couldn't laugh like I used to. I felt small and exposed. That's when one of her friends looked straight at Abigail and said, "Hey, let's go outside." She said it casually, not to sound like a command. Abigail looked confused at first, like she wasn't sure why. But then she stood up and followed without saying anything. I just sat there and couldn't touch my food in front of me. I looked calm, but I was angry inside. A few minutes later, she came back to the table. She didn't look at me. She sat down, smiled at her friend across the table, and rejoined the conversation like nothing had happened. But this time, she didn't say another word about me. That was the night I knew I couldn't pretend anymore that I was fine. In the car, after that dinner, Abigail kept trying to talk to me like nothing had happened, but I didn't respond. And after a few minutes, she noticed. She kept glancing at me and eventually said, "Why are you acting like this? You always take things too seriously. It's just how I talk." Her tone was defensive, irritated, like I was the problem for reacting to how she treated me. But I didn't argue or try to make her understand why I was hurt. And that silence caught her off guard. Because usually, when we had moments like this, I'd try to explain myself, or I'd try to smooth it over. Try to get us back to a good place. But not this time. I didn't have the strength. In my mind, I had made my decision. That public disrespect at dinner? The way she looked at me was like I was a burden. The way she kept tearing me down, like I was an easy joke she could pass around the table? I was done receiving them. I wasn't about to keep being a man who smiled while being humiliated just to keep the peace. Not anymore. When we got home that night, she walked in like everything would go back to normal in a day or two. She probably expected me to cool off like always. She didn't apologize. Didn't even ask if I was okay. And honestly, I think part of her didn't believe I'd ever actually do anything. But I did what I've never done before. I pulled all the way back. I stopped talking to her. I didn't make small talk. I didn't try to cuddle in bed, even though she declined more times than she agreed. In fact, I didn't sleep in the bed at all. That Saturday night, I went straight to the couch. Same on Sunday. She didn't say much either, probably waiting for me to cave like always. But I wasn't going to cave. By Monday morning, we were both getting ready for work when she turned to me and asked, "So you're still angry?" in that same guilt-tripping tone she always used, like I was holding the marriage hostage by having feelings. I looked at her, and then looked away, without saying a word. I left the house early that day, but I didn't go to work. What she didn't know was that the day before, I had already scheduled an appointment with a divorce lawyer. I spent that Monday morning sitting in an office, calmly telling the lawyer that I wanted to file. I didn't want to wait. I needed it to start now. And once that was done, I knew I couldn't go back to that house and pretend for even another night. I couldn't pretend to be civil or controlled when I was fighting not to explode. I needed space and distance. So when I was done with work that same day, I went to meet my boss, then explained to him that I would want to take some days off because of an emergency. I didn't give him details, but I sounded like someone was about to die. Thankfully, he agreed to give me some days off. I went back home before my wife did. I packed most of my things I needed and a few things I couldn't leave behind. I didn't leave a note or tell her where I was going. I just got in the car, and I drove through the night until I reached my parents' place in the next state. It was the longest drive I've ever made in one stretch. But weirdly enough, I didn't feel tired. At first, Abigail didn't call after I moved out. Not that night, not the next. There was silence, like maybe she was giving me time to cool off, or maybe she thought I was bluffing. But when the divorce papers were finally served to her, that's when my phone rang. I saw her name on the screen and didn't even hesitate. I picked up. Her voice came through sharp, irritated. She said, "Is this the game you want to play?" I listened for a second, then ended the call. There was nothing meaningful in her words. No remorse. No accountability. Just more of the same tone that had worn me down for years. After that, she didn't waste time. She got herself a lawyer, and we officially entered the divorce process. That's when the blame started. Through her lawyer, she claimed that I wasn't fulfilling my responsibilities as a man, that I wasn't stepping up, that I was weak, unmotivated, and the reason the marriage fell apart. I didn't fight fire with fire, but I made it clear. I told the court plainly that her lack of respect over time had turned our marriage into something toxic. The daily disrespect, the constant belittling, and the emotional erosion made staying unbearable. We were renting at the time, so there was no house to divide. Our joint account had already been drained months earlier when I was unemployed, so there wasn't much money to argue over. And with the marriage being under 5 years, the entire case was pretty straightforward. No kids. No real assets. On paper, it should have been clean. But there was one part that caught me off guard. During the financial disclosures, I found out that Abigail had been making significantly more money than I ever did. Even back when I had my high-paying job, she still out-earned me. That alone wasn't the shock. It was the fact that she knew I was struggling when I lost my job, and still, she never once offered to help. She watched me carry everything alone, all while criticizing me for not doing enough. All those times I skipped meals, dipped into savings, stressed about paying rent, while she had the means to support us, and simply chose not to. In the end, the court ordered her to pay me spousal support for a time frame, which she clearly wasn't happy about. She made that obvious in her body language, her silence, and through her lawyer's tone. But I didn't care. And if she had to share a fraction of what she had after letting me sink alone, so be it. After the divorce was finalized, I thought that would be the end of everything. But a few days later, the same friend who had pulled Abigail aside during that dinner reached out to me privately. I hadn't spoken to her since that night, and I honestly wasn't sure what to expect from her call. But when I picked up the phone, she didn't waste time sugarcoating anything. She said, "You didn't deserve any of what you went through." Her voice was calm but serious. She told me she'd seen how Abigail spoke to me over time, and that what happened at the dinner wasn't a one-off. She admitted something I never knew, that Abigail had been making me the butt of jokes in their girls' group interactions. I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. I had been disrespected, and I let slide too many times. But not this time. This time, I chose to leave a situation that was crushing me piece by piece. That conversation with her friend validated everything I'd been feeling, but couldn't quite put into words during the marriage.